Imagine walking through the streets of modern York in northern England. Tourists move through narrow lanes lined with historic buildings. Cafes spill out onto cobbled streets. The towering York Minster rises above the city, one of the largest Gothic cathedrals in Europe. But if you stood in this same place around the year 900, the city would feel very different. The name would not even be York. It would be Jorvik. The language spoken in the streets would sound closer to Old Norse than modern English. Traders from across northern Europe would fill the markets. Ships would arrive along the River Ouse, carrying goods from Scandinavia, Ireland, and the Baltic. This was not simply an English town. For nearly a century, York was one of the most important Viking cities in Europe. To understand how that happened, we need to go back to the moment when Roman Britain collapsed and a new era began. Long before the Vikings arrived, York had already been an important city for centuries. The Romans called it Eboracum. Founded in the 1st century AD, it served as a major military base and administrative center in northern Britain. Roman legions were stationed there to control the surrounding territories. At its height, Eboracum was one of the most significant cities in Roman Britain. Stone walls surrounded the settlement. Straight Roman roads connected it to other towns. Public buildings, bathhouses, temples, and administrative halls filled the city. Roman emperors even visited. In fact, the emperor Septimius Severus died in York in the year 211 AD while campaigning in northern Britain. But this Roman world would not last forever. By the early 5th century, Roman authority in Britain collapsed. The empire could no longer maintain its armies in the province, and Roman administrators withdrew. Across Britain, many Roman cities declined. Eboracum was no exception. When Roman government disappeared, the urban systems that had supported cities began to break down. Road maintenance stopped. Trade networks shrank. Public buildings were abandoned. For several centuries after the Romans left, York appears to have shrunk dramatically. Archaeological evidence suggests parts of the city were abandoned or reused in simpler ways. Stone structures collapsed or were dismantled for building material. The population was likely far smaller than it had been under Roman rule. However, the location of the city still mattered. York sat at a strategic point where rivers and land routes met. The River Ouse allowed ships to travel inland from the North Sea, linking the settlement to wider trade networks. This geographic advantage meant the city never completely disappeared. Instead, it slowly transformed into an Anglo-Saxon settlement. By the early medieval period, it was known as Eoforwic. But another transformation was coming, one that would connect the city to a much larger world of trade, warfare, and migration. The Vikings began appearing in Britain in the late 8th century. Early raids targeted monasteries and coastal settlements. These attacks were fast and often destructive. But by the mid-9th century, the pattern began to change. Instead of short raids, large Viking armies arrived and began conquering territory. One of the most famous of these forces was known as the Great Heathen Army. In 866, this army captured the city of York. For the Vikings, York was a valuable prize. The city was already fortified by Roman walls that still stood in many places. It sat on a river system that allowed ships to reach deep inland, and it was located in a region that could support farming and trade. The Vikings renamed the city Jorvik. Over the next decades, it became the center of a Scandinavian-controlled kingdom in northern England. Unlike the image of Vikings as purely raiders, the inhabitants of Jorvik were also traders, craftsmen, and settlers. The city quickly developed into a major commercial center. Archaeological excavations, particularly those conducted in the late 20th century, have revealed extraordinary details about life in Viking York. One of the most famous excavation sites is Coppergate, where waterlogged soil preserved organic materials that usually decay over time. Because of this preservation, historians have been able to reconstruct everyday life with remarkable accuracy. Wooden buildings line the streets. Workshops operated behind houses. Markets sold goods from across northern Europe. Jorvik was not a crude frontier settlement. It was a thriving medieval town connected to an international trading network. Walking through Jorvik around the year 900 would have been a sensory experience very different from modern York. The streets were narrow and often muddy. Most buildings were made of timber rather than stone. Wooden frames supported walls made from wattle and daub, a mixture of woven branches and clay. Roofs were typically thatched with straw. Houses often served multiple purposes. The front of a building might function as a shop or workshop, while the family lived in rooms behind or above it. Animals moved through the streets alongside people. Waste disposal was basic. Rubbish and organic waste were frequently thrown into pits or nearby waterways. Despite these conditions, the city was busy and productive. Craft workers produced tools, clothing, jewelry, and household items. Merchants sold imported goods. Ships arrived, regularly carrying cargo. The urban economy was active and diverse. One of the most remarkable aspects of Jorvik was its connection to long-distance trade. Archaeological discoveries show that goods arrived from across Europe and beyond. Items found in York include amber from the Baltic region, silk that likely traveled through trade routes connected to the Byzantine Empire, coins from the Islamic world, glassware from continental Europe. These discoveries reveal something important. The Viking world was not isolated. Instead, it was deeply integrated into global trade networks stretching across Eurasia. Jorvik functioned as a northern hub within this system. Traders from Scandinavia, Ireland, and Anglo-Saxon England all passed through the city. Markets would have been lively places where languages mixed and goods changed hands. Jorvik was also a center of craft production. Excavations have uncovered evidence of many specialized trades. Blacksmiths produced iron tools and weapons. Bone carvers shaped combs and decorative objects. Leatherworkers created shoes and belts. Texts workers spun wool and wove cloth. These crafts were not small household activities alone. Some areas of the city appear to have been dedicated to specific types of production, suggesting organized economic activity. For example, large numbers of antler fragments discovered at excavation sites indicate comb-making workshops. Combs were essential tools in Viking society, used for grooming and personal care. They were also traded widely. The presence of such workshops suggests Jorvik was producing goods not just for local use, but for export across the Viking trading network. Religion in Viking York was complex. The Scandinavian settlers who first arrived practiced traditional Norse pagan beliefs. These included the worship of gods such as Odin, Thor, and Freyr. However, by the 10th century, Christianity was spreading throughout the Viking world. York itself had been an important Christian center during the Anglo-Saxon period, and this tradition continued even under Viking rule. Over time, many Viking rulers in England converted to Christianity. Churches operated in the city, and Christian burial practices became more common. This blending of cultures is visible in archaeological finds. Some artifacts show Scandinavian artistic styles combined with Christian symbols. The transition from paganism to Christianity did not happen overnight. Instead, it was a gradual process shaped by political alliances, cultural exchange, and social change. During the Viking period, York served as the capital of the Kingdom of Jorvik. Several Scandinavian kings ruled from the city. Their authority extended across large parts of northern England. However, political control was often unstable. Anglo-Saxon kingdoms in southern England were growing stronger during this time. The rulers of Wessex, particularly in the 10th century, gradually pushed northward. York became a contested city. Control shifted between Viking rulers and Anglo-Saxon kings multiple times. Despite these political struggles,
the city remained
economically important. Trade continued. Craft production continued. Daily life carried on for most residents, regardless of which ruler controlled the city. By the mid-10th century, the balance of power in England had changed. The Anglo-Saxon Kingdom of England, led by King Sucius Aethelstan and later rulers, expanded northward. In 954, Viking rule in York finally came to an end. The last Viking king of Jorvik, Eric Bloodaxe, was expelled. York became part of the unified English kingdom. However, the Viking influence did not disappear. The Scandinavian settlers who had lived in the region remained. Their language, culture, and trade networks continued shaping northern England for generations. Even today, many place names in the region reflect Old Norse origins. If you walk through modern York today, you can still see traces of this long history. Parts of the Roman walls still stand. The street layout of the medieval city remains largely intact. Some street names even preserve Viking heritage. For example, the famous street Coppergate includes the Old Norse word gata, meaning street. Archaeological discoveries have also brought Viking York back to life. Museums in the city display artifacts uncovered from excavations, including tools, jewelry, clothing fragments, and everyday household items. These objects provide an unusually detailed view into daily life over 1,000 years ago. They remind us that the Viking Age was not only about raids and battles. It was also about cities, markets, families, and communities. Over centuries, the city continued evolving. The Norman conquest in 1066 brought new rulers and new forms of administration. Stone castles and churches reshaped the urban landscape. Trade expanded during the medieval period, linking York to wider English and European markets. The Viking city of Jorvik gradually transformed into the medieval English city of York. Yet the foundations laid during the Viking period remained important. The city's role as a trading hub, its strategic river location, and its established urban infrastructure helped sustain its importance for centuries. York today is often seen as one of England's most historic cities, but its story is not defined by a single culture or period. Roman soldiers built the first Great Walls. Anglo-Saxon communities reshaped the settlement after Rome's fall. Viking traders turned it into Jorvik, a powerful northern trading center. Later, medieval kings and church leaders transformed it again. Each layer left its mark on the city. When visitors walk through York streets today, they are moving through a landscape shaped by nearly 2,000 years of urban history. And hidden beneath those streets, preserved in layers of soil and artifacts, is the memory of Jorvik, the Viking city that once connected northern England to a vast network of trade and culture stretching across Europe.